Let me guess, you are staring at your investment account wondering what the heck you should actually buy. Maybe you are worried about picking the wrong investments or feeling overwhelmed by all the choices. Or maybe you just want someone to tell you exactly what to do. Trust me, I have been there, and that's exactly why I'm making this video. By the way, this is the third video of my complete 6-part guide for beginners to get their first year of investing right. Now, if you have watched the first 2 videos in this series, you have already done something that most people never do. You got clear on your goals and opened the right accounts. But for today, the goal is that by the end of this video, you will know exactly what to buy in your investment account. And more importantly, you will understand why it's right for you. Before we start picking specific investments, we need to understand the basic building blocks of investing. And I think it's easier to use analogies to explain things. So let me share one that really helped me understand this. Think about building a house. You have got your foundation, your walls, and your roof, each serving a different but important purpose. Well, investing has its own basic building blocks, and we call this asset classes. Let's break down the 3 main ones. So first, we have got stocks. When you buy stocks, you're basically becoming a business owner, even if you just buy a tiny piece of a company like Apple or Nike. And just like owning a business, stocks can be really rewarding when things go well. Historically, stocks perform around 10% per year on average, but they can also be pretty bumpy along the way. Next up are bonds. Now, if the stocks are like being a business owner, bonds are like being the bank. When you buy bonds, you are basically lending money. The government or companies borrow your money and they promise to pay you back with interest. It's pretty straightforward. And bonds are generally more stable than stocks, but that stability usually means lower returns over time, typically around 4 to 5% per year. And finally, we have what we call cash equivalents. So these are things like money market funds or high yield savings account, and think of this as your safety net. They're not going to make you rich, but they will keep your money safe and will give you a little bit of interest while they are at it. Right now, you might get around 4 to 5% in your high yield savings account or money market fund. Now, just like you wouldn't build a house with only the foundation or only the walls or only the roof, most successful investors do not use just one type of investment. They combine them. And the way you combine them, that depends on your goals. What's your objective? Which is exactly why we spent so much time on goals in the first 2 videos. But let's put this analogy aside because combining these blocks is the topic of our next video, the 4th one in this series. Right now, let's talk about something really important, the 2 main ways you can invest in these asset classes. The first way is by buying individual investments. So with stocks, this means picking specific companies like Google or Microsoft. With bonds, it means choosing specific bonds from companies or governments. Here's what it really takes to be successful at picking individual investments. Hours of research for each company you invest in, constant monitoring of companies' news and earnings, understanding financial statements, buying enough different companies to spread out your risk, and strong emotional control when markets get rocky. Now, what if I told you that there's another way, a way that even many professional investors prefer? Instead of trying to pick individual stocks one by one, what if you could own hundreds or even thousands of companies all at once? That's exactly what investment funds let you do. Think of it this way. Instead of going to the grocery store and carefully picking out each ingredient to make a meal, a recipe, investment funds are like buying a pre-made meal kit where everything's already perfectly portioned and ready to go for that recipe. You still get the result you want, but without all the stress and time of doing everything yourself. Let me break down the main types of investment funds you will come across. Each one has its own features that might make sense for different situations. So first up, we have mutual funds. These have been around the longest and are probably what your parents invested in. And here's how they work. A bunch of people pull their money together and professional managers invested across many different companies or bonds. Think of it like a big investment club where professional managers make the decisions for everyone. Some key things to know about are that you can only buy or sell them once per day after the market closes. Professional managers actively pick what goes into the fund. They typically have higher fees because you're paying for that professional management, and many mutual funds might require a minimum amount to start investing. Next, we have ETFs or exchange traded funds, and these are like mutual funds' younger siblings. They also pull money from many investors, but they work a bit differently. Most ETFs use computers to track specific sets of investments rather than relying on professional managers. You can buy them and sell them anytime during market hours, just like stocks. And they typically have lower fees since they don't need to pay professional managers. And it also doesn't require a minimum amount to start investing. In fact, you can even buy a fraction of a share. Now, before I tell you about the third type of fund, let me explain something important. The stock market is basically a collection of all publicly traded companies. And just like we have thermometers to measure temperature, we have something called indexes to measure how the overall market is doing. The most famous index is called the S&P 500, and it simply tracks the 500 largest companies in America. When you hear on the news, the market went up today, the market went down, they are usually talking about indexes like this one. And this brings us to something important called index funds. Remember how mutual funds and ETFs have different ways to invest in many companies at once? Well, both can use a special strategy called index investing. So instead of having managers pick which companies to invest in, these funds simply try to match a specific market index. If you buy an S&P 500 index fund, you automatically own tiny pieces of all 500 companies in that index. So you're going to own Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and hundreds more. So one purchase and you own a slice of 500 companies. And you can do this through either an index mutual fund, which follows the mutual fund rules, or an index ETF, which follows the ETF rules. So besides the S&P 500 index funds, there are different types of index funds that track different parts of the market. There's a total market index fund, which basically owns every publicly traded American company, and that's over 3,500 companies. There are international index funds that let you own companies from around the world. So think about Toyota or Samsung. And there are bonds index funds that track thousands of different bonds from governments and companies. There are even index funds for specific industries or sectors like technology, which owns companies like Apple or Microsoft. Now, you might be thinking, if picking investments is so complicated, how can simply buying everything in an index be a good strategy? Well, let me share something fascinating. This simple approach has such a strong track record that even Warren Buffett, one of the world's most successful investors, recommends it for most people. In fact, Buffett was so confident about this that he made a $1 million bet about it. In 2007, he bet that a simple S&P 500 index fund would outperform a group of hedge funds over 10 years. And by the way, hedge funds are these fancy investment funds run by some of the smartest people on Wall Street. You want to know what happened? The index fund won by a landslide. It gained 125%, while the hedge funds only managed about 3 to 87%. See, Buffett understands three really important things. So first of all, successful stock picking requires an enormous amount of time. We're talking about reading thousands of pages of financial reports, understanding complex business models, and constantly monitoring the market. And that's literally Buffett's full-time job and has been for over 60 years. Second of all, even professional investors with all their research and fancy degrees usually can't beat the market consistently over the long term. Think about it. If the pros can do it reliably, what chance do most of us have? And third, this is the big one. Buffett knows that most people's biggest enemy in investing isn't picking the wrong stocks. It's their own behavior. When you own individual stocks, it's really tempting to buy and sell based on emotions, news, or trying to time the market. With index funds, you're more likely to stay the course and let time work its magic. And that's why Buffett gives this advice to almost everyone, including his own family. He actually instructed the trustee of his estate to invest 90% of his wife's inheritance in low-cost index fund. If that's good enough for Warren Buffett's family, it's probably good enough for most of us. Now that you understand the different types of funds and why index funds are so powerful, let's talk about something really important: how to actually choose a fund. Don't worry, I'm going to make this super simple. The first thing you need to know is exactly what are you buying. I know it sounds obvious, right? But you will be surprised how many people skip this part. Every fund has what's called a fund fact sheet. Think of it like a resume for the fund. And just like a resume, it tells you everything you need to know about what the fund does. Let me show you exactly how to read one of these fund sheets. So you're gonna pull up any fund on your broker's website and you're gonna look for something that says fund details or prospectus. And here's what you're gonna find. So first, there's the fund's objective. Think of it as its main goal. So for example, an S&P 500 fund might say something like this. This fund aims to track the S&P 500 index, which consists of 500 of the largest American companies. It's pretty straightforward. But here's where it gets really interesting. If you scroll down a little bit, you're gonna find the fund's holdings. And this shows you exactly what companies or investments the fund holds. So for example, you're gonna have something that says the top 10 holdings. These are basically the biggest investments in the fund. You're gonna have a sector breakdown, so how much of the fund is invested in technology, in healthcare, and so on. And then you're gonna have a geographic breakdown, which consists of which countries this fund is invested in. And here's something really cool. These fact sheets also show you how the fund has performed over time. But remember, past performance does not guarantee future results. It's just one piece of the puzzle. Now let's talk about the cost, because even small fees can take a big bite out of your returns over time. And there are three numbers that you need to look at. So first of all is the expense ratio, which is what you pay the fund company each year to manage your money. And let me show you why this matters with a real example. Imagine you invest $10,000 and it grows by 7% each year for 30 years. With a 0.1% expense ratio, which is typical for index funds, you would end up with about $74,000. But with a 1% expense ratio, which is common for actively managed funds, you would only have about $57,000. And that's a $17,000 difference just from fees. And you might also want to check the minimum investment. That's how much money you need to start. But here's some good news. Many brokers offer fractional shares, meaning that you can only start with a few dollars. And finally, look for any trading fees. And just remember, understand what you're buying and keep this cost low when possible. So far in this series, you have learned how to get ready to start investing, what accounts to open, and what investments can provide good results while simplifying your life. In our next video, I will show you exactly how I combine all of this knowledge to build an investment portfolio. If you don't want to miss it, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye-bye.